welcome to the Speak and Flow podcast, where we share unique experiences to help you elevate your leadership voice and effective communication. Today, we have Chris Wong. So glad he's here. He's the founder and principal of Richmond Construction Consulting. He's an aviation expert, so construction expert focused and specialized in the aviation industry. And so fascinating to me. We get to hear someone in the aviation industry and doing the hot, big things in SFO and other airports. And so welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Melinda. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here. So why don't we just get started? Can you tell us a little bit about how you even got into this industry and what you do?
Sure. I studied civil engineering at UC Davis, and then quickly kind of got a couple internships with the city and county of San Francisco.
Okay.
Their project at SFO, at their project management department, and really kind of fell in love with construction. Both of my parents are kind of have construction adjacent careers as well. My dad's an architect. My mom ran facilities at hospitals and helped do execute various construction projects in the healthcare industry. And that kind of led me to then pursuing my own career in the construction field.
Wonderful. Wow. So you just right out the gate, huh? You just got an amazing opportunity for you.
Yeah, I'd say I was fairly lucky in terms of how I came upon that opportunity, and was something that really interested me in terms of having a balance of being out in the field and seeing something be built, as well as kind of a tangible or like a office aspect of a job.
Yeah. I mean, that requires both the hard skills and then also the soft skills.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the key challenges that you see when it comes to aviation, construction, and getting something built like that? I mean, it takes an enormous amount, all these different teams, partners. It's a lot going on.
Yeah, I think you could even take a step back before adding the aviation. Just a construction project in general is fairly difficult to execute. You have so many different entities involved. You have your owner, you have your designers, architects, engineers, you have your contractor, you have your subcontractors. There's so many different parties that are involved in getting a construction project executed. Adding the layer of aviation on top of that is that your typical construction project, you may be able to put a fence around it, and that site is the contractors to be able to go build the project. In aviation, a lot of the time, more often than not, you don't see too many brand new airports being built. You're working in an occupied environment that's operating 24/7, and it's like working in somebody's house.
They're still living there.
Yeah, they're still living there, exactly.
Right.
You're not going to start tearing down walls without telling your landlord or the owner that I'm going to be working here and when you're going to be working on it. So it's a much different type of level of coordination required to be able to do construction at an airport.
And so what do you think it has helped you?
I think what's helped me is really I learned from a couple other people, just observing how, as I mentioned, I started as an intern, observing how they managed their relationships with the stakeholders, and kind of at an early age, just kind of putting things away in terms of, okay, I like this, I maybe wouldn't do this way. And then kind of when I eventually gained a little bit more responsibility, developed my own style in terms of how I was able to develop relationships with the stakeholders and communicating with them. I think my approach has really been to spend a little bit more one-on-one time when I have the opportunity to understand what each stakeholder's responsibilities are, what are their priorities when it comes to a particular project, so that I'm able to help advocate on their behalf when it comes to certain design or construction decisions that are being made throughout the duration of execution of a construction project. And so I think it's really just, for me, it's communicating with them, developing the relationship, and then also demonstrating an understanding to them of what their priorities and values are for a particular project. Yeah, I think there's instances where in a lot of these large projects, $100 million or more, billion-dollar projects I've been a part of, we have meetings that have 15, 20 different people. The stakeholders are typically individual contributors, like independent contributors that have their own job, and then being a stakeholder to the project's secondary, right? And they're trying to advocate on behalf of a large organization like an airport, what they think needs to be incorporated into the design. But in those settings of 15 to 20 people, they're a little bit shyer for whatever reason. And I think I've taken upon myself at certain times to kind of be able to advocate for them and prompt them certain times when I know they need to perhaps speak up, and it shouldn't always be coming from me, even though I'm a consultant or an owner's rep, that the design team or the rest of the project team really needs to hear it from the stakeholders. So I can help tease out some of those in the communication from them, because I understand what their priorities are as it relates to the project.
Wow, that's a lot of work on your part, and sincerity. And I mean, I think that also, I mean, I can even sense your approachability and your genuineness to build that relationship, even though it does take some extra effort. But it sounds like it's gone, to help 10,000 times fold, because the people, the stakeholders, what their priorities are, and then you're even advocating for them. And so that's really awesome, that you have both the knowledge of the project, the industry knowledge, your area of expertise, but also the genuineness and the relationship building. Like you said, you learn how to build these relationships in a way that I think ultimately helps the team overall.
Yeah.
And how about and then how about when they don't agree? Like, what do you do?
I think throughout a construction project, you're not always going to agree on every
decision.
A lot of those decisions, though, are made based upon what budget, schedule, and the owners of those projects have to make some of those decisions. We just have to present them with that information and explain to them why we made those decisions, and that those decisions weren't made in a vacuum, in terms of like, no, they made a request and we're just telling them no to that one request. It's that there is a laundry list of requests, and we've methodically, or the project team has methodically gone through in terms of what items they can or cannot proceed with, in terms of what does the building need or the airport want to prioritize from an execution standpoint, from a budget. Right.
Mainly budget and time.
Yeah. I mean, those are the big drivers. But I mean, there are certain instances where, there's sustainability decisions are driving things as well, like the airport willing to invest in sustainable alternatives and delivery methods that aren't always going to be the most economical decisions, right? But they're doing that with a very thoughtful approach.
Yeah. Have you made a decision before, and then someone came and actually influenced your decision? Like, what made that successful, that communication, in terms of influencing your decision about something?
And I think sometimes, and maybe it's not influence, but I think you have to be, when you're talking dollars and cents, and a project standpoint, you can't always be influenced by some of that. I think it's those decisions aren't made individually, like independently by me. They're made by the team and evaluated holistically, as it relates to the overall project, because an airport project will have 80 to 100 different stakeholders that, like, you can't just be swayed by one, right? Every single time somebody wants something, it needs to be taken into consideration of the overall picture of the project.
Right. So if someone's trying to propose something, they really have to consider the overall project and know all the pieces and components of the overall project and how their piece affects everybody else.
Yeah, it's explaining the context of how decisions are made. So as much as they may attempt to influence and everybody's going to advocate for their interests, it's a give and take.
Right. And so what one or two, as a project manager, one or two strategies, tips that you can share for someone who's running a large project?
So I would say, so tips, I mean, everybody's a little bit different. I don't say the way I do things is the best way or not. I mean, everybody's different. But for me, I think I really focus on the relationship side of things. In terms of you understanding them, you get much more cooperation or participation from stakeholders who know your meetings are going to be productive and they're going to be heard throughout, versus if you don't have a relationship with them, you throw a meeting on somebody's calendar and they don't show up and you're like, well, why didn't they show up to the meeting? It's like you haven't they don't know who you are, or you're new to the organization. And there's a lot of that, as the airport having a large capital program, there are not just one project being executed at a time. There's a dozen projects being executed at a time, and stakeholders' times are constantly being sought after, right? So that's a whole nother aspect of just trying to coordinate schedules, which is not really the communication side, but if you have a good relationship and you've established with those stakeholders because you reached out to them individually, they're much more likely to kind of participate, or if they aren't able to participate, you find 15-20 minutes one-on-one. Hey, this is the agenda we're going to cover. If you can't make it, can you help me understand what are your priorities? And then some will trust you to kind of speak on their behalf in those meetings, and that because you've had that chance. And so it's really about the relationships. Like, Kim, got to keep
I love it. Yes.
And your ability to communicate with folks.
Do you see any, what are some of the things that you see when people are trying to build relationships that do not work? Like, there's certain behaviors maybe let's just focus on the construction aviation industry, certain behaviors that people have that are we don't want to do that.
I wouldn't say if it's behaviors, it's certain people's approach in terms of just being passive in terms of their communication.
Got it.
They only correspond over as much as we're in a technological world, right? These days, people really appreciate the face-to-face, or you pick up the phone and talk to them versus playing just emailing back and forth 5 or 6 times, and you still don't understand the root cause of the problem, right? Or you're not aligning, and I think that is really a challenge, something that happens more often than not, that a problem can be solved by a 30 or 60-second phone call versus you spending time 15-20 minutes for preparing a response, and that still didn't actually answer the question, right? Or didn't hit the point. So I think that is how we communicate these days with technology, right? Is different, that I think is not as many people do. And I may be speaking out of turn, but that's, I think, just what I've observed in terms of who was more successful are the people who are willing to pick up the phone or go meet somebody in person for a site walk, versus the ones who just sit back behind the computer and email away, and then hopefully somebody's doing what they asked.
Right. I agree. I can't, I mean, I just pick up the phone. I feel like typing it out requires more work for me. So I do pick up the phone, but there are people that are really, they're just accustomed to on the phone or text. And it's like, why are we doing this? I just pick up the phone. So I agree with you on that one.
I mean,
but what I do know that is even meetings, though, sometimes I could do better with meeting in person nowadays. I have been lately, let's just do virtual meetings. So, but then I think there's so much value. I think, like you said, the successful people will take the time. It does require more effort on our part, but at least having that one-to-one relationship, meeting in person, it's just so different. And it adds value.
I mean, there's plenty of, even just this, like seeing each other face to face, turning the camera on when you're talking to somebody is better than hiding, maybe not necessarily hiding, but just being behind an email address, right?
But I still think some people, like behind the email, and this is better, but there are still people that present and turn off the camera. They're the presenter and they have the camera off. So I mean, if there's nothing else to take away, I mean, I think, like you're saying, the importance of building relationships, it does sometimes take a little bit more extra effort, but I think it does pay off, right? Especially when you need to work as a team, when there's important decisions that need to be made, but at least you've had the initial contact. Like you said, you met with the person privately, one-to-one, got to know them, got to know their priorities, and then later on, when you have to make important decisions, you had that initial contact to have been with the person, and the person knows you, and that trust, you start to form the trust and the relationship, because those difficult conversations and decisions without that initial trust are going to be harder to make, and then ultimately cost the job.
I mean, I will say, like, I've benefited from being at the same client site for over 10 years. So it's like, I don't expect everybody to be able to like pick up the phone and call somebody, and like I know like, oh, this person had a kid recently, like all of the personal details of the people that we work with, right? And I don't expect that, but I think there are some things that people could do better in terms of when you're introduced to a new client site or a new project that it's a new environment that you're just not familiar with, to be able to create that network for yourself that's gonna help you get a project delivered.
Right. Like you said, some of the subs that come on board, they're like, oh, they don't know what it is to work at the aviation. They think it's going to be the same as what they do at another construction site.
Right.
So they could have benefited with just like really taking the time to get to know the environment, the new environment that they're in, the new players, the new people, and
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think specific example for me is that, like, you know, if I'm not perfect, I will admit, like, I've made certain mistakes or overlooked something on a project, right? And, you know, having communicated or established the relationships with those folks that like may be adversely affected by a miss, they're much more willing to work with you and try to help you solve whatever happened, if like, because you've taken the time to work with them. They know it wasn't maliciously done, or it wasn't just like your oversight wasn't malicious, right? And so they're more likely to try to help you out in those instances when something does go awry. And so I think that's another benefit just to what we're describing in terms of communicating with folks, developing those relationships.
I love it. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate your time, your wisdom, sharing your strategies for relationship building. I think they're so important, and it's a good for, you know, people to start doing it, to start keeping it at the forefront, to start keeping it as a purposeful way of living and being, especially as a professional.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And as a leader. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And so Chris Wong with Richmond Construction Consulting. You're in San Francisco. in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Melinda.
Thank you
really
so
appreciate
much.
the opportunity.
I'm so glad you're here working at our aviation and our airports, and we're in good hands.
I'd like to believe so, but
you're humble. You're humble too. That's why. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, listeners. Glad you're here.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Are you curious on how you measure up with your ability to speak in flow? Come grab my free self-assessment at https://speakinflow.com/assessment. And I'll see you on the other side.